So let's start this session. So today we will be basically discussing about bypassing the security control. And by now we have basically introduced various concepts. And last time we have discussed about the web server compromise and the cloud security. And we have presented the theoretical and a background view of the same. Okay, and we'll be also discussing about the Linux part after this session. So when you talk about bypassing the security control, okay, remember in any of the IT infrastructures, in order to safeguard the information that is residing inside the network, okay, whether it is on the host or whether it is getting transmitted in the medium within the network, security controls are basically put in the point which will ensure that the data that is there, okay, is not going to be accessed by an unauthorized person. However, okay, despite all these kind of efforts, there is still possibility that some people can bypass these security controls. So you will see that in most of the enterprises, many of the time, because of the negligence, okay, or the neglected aspect of the configurations, it is possible that the network may be compromised. And therefore, as a penetration tester, you need to always look into whether the system can be bypassed, okay, or the security control can be bypassed. In fact, in most of the cases, what happens even in the penetration testing or red team exercises, it is being seen that people do not give more weightage or more attention to bypassing the security control. Okay, so therefore you need to look into this aspect, and therefore in all penetration testing activities, as a penetration tester, or even if you are going to be an attacker, you need to understand that what is that is rendering the exploits ineffective while performing the active attack on the target or the network system. Okay, so sometimes what happens is that you have done so much of efforts, but still you may not be able to achieve the target. So bypassing the security control is one of the important aspects that both the parties will be interested, whether you are an attacker or whether you are going to be a penetration testers. Okay, so basically today we'll be talking about the different types of security controls that are in place, which will help you to identify the systematic way of, or the process of overcoming these kind of controls, and how you can basically bypass that. So as far as the bypassing of the security controls are concerned, okay, since I am going to be working into basically a network environment, okay, so therefore the network security access control comes into picture. So what is network security access control? If you talk about network security access control, basically it is going to be kind of say IEEE 802.1x standard. So most of the network environment that you are having, they are all going to be compliant of this network access control in order to basically protect its assets, including the network nodes, switches, firewalls, routers, etc. and so on. So जितने भी आपके digital assets हैं, उसे आप इस control के through protect करते हैं. So basically you will find out that if you have a network and you have applied the network security control, then, and if it is in place and properly being implemented, then in that case it will be helping you to prevent the intrusion by the policies, and also define who can access what. Okay, so as far as the network security control is concerned, there is no very specific criteria or the standardization, depending upon the architecture, environment, regularization, standardization. Okay, things may be depending. Okay, sometimes it may also be depending upon the vendor. Okay, and the way it has been implemented in that particular environment. So what is basically the main objective of network security access control or network access control? You will see that the primary objective is basically to control these devices and the elements that are going to be there, whether it is the host, whether it is switching elements or something like that, which are basically part of the network or they are connected. Then we need to basically ensure that they are going to be tested for compliance, whether they are really working as per the expectations or what it is supposed to do. So it is not just merely creating a network, but you need to also test that whether their configuration is correct and it works as per the expectation. And if it doesn't, then in that case, it is liable to be bypassed by any of the attacks in future. So technically, network access control can be classified under two different categories, which called as a pre-admission NAC and the post-admission NAC. Okay, so pre-admission and post-admission NAC का जो activity map है, that is being shown onto the slide, where you can just say that the pre-admission NAC has got several things like, say, adding new elements, identifying the rules, disabling the endpoint security, etc., and so on. It is as simple as that. If you already have an existing architecture and it is working fine, and if somebody adds a new device into it, okay, so that may bring some kind of a disturbance into the existing architecture, and it may lead to some kind of vulnerabilities which can be exploited. Okay, so there are several different kind of aspects that are going to be associated with this network access control, and you can basically look forward to that in order to bypass. Okay, so as a penetration tester, also as an attacker, also you will be always keen in knowing all these things. Okay, if is it possible. Now let us just try to explore a little bit more about this pre-admission NAC and the post-admission NAC. Now, as far as the pre-admission NAC is concerned, okay, so we'll just say that you have several controls that may be put it into the network or on the host or the devices. So what we do is that all the controls are going to be put in place by the security requirement in order to add a new device to the network. Okay, so you have to ensure that if any kind of new addition is happening, okay, so still the network should be secure. So therefore, you have to put all the security controls in proper place. Okay, say for example, you have to put certain things at the perimeter network or the internal, or you have to check at the endpoints and similar kind of a thing. Okay, so basically there may be different approaches that may be there as far as the pre-admission NAC is concerned. Typically, you'll find out that if you have a network, okay, and you are deploying the NAC, that is the network access control. Okay, so in any of the enterprises or the organization, okay, so if it is already in place, we will be able to identify if any new elements are basically added to the network. Okay, so if NAC is implemented properly, then in that case, अगर कोई भी आप नया device network में add होता है, तो immediately it should be able to know that. And usually you'll find out these new devices might be, okay, possible intruders, okay, elements which are not supposed to be there. So when you are going to be doing the penetration testing, okay, so specifically when you are talking about red team exercises or the internal penetration testing, so what happens is that typically an attacker will try to add the device to the network. And this could be done such as, say, for example, you have PWN Express NAC, and you may be able to bypass the restriction set by the NAC. And especially if you look into the Kali, okay, so Kali mein aap basically PWN Express NAC you can run, and you can run on the device, and then you can maintain the shell access to the added device. Okay, so adding of the device is possible, okay, even though the network might have been secured with security control. So basically what we want to do is that we want to have a scenario where something is being added, but still it is not being, okay, identified as something which is going to be threat to the network. So typically what you can do is that you can bypass the MAC address authentication, or open authentication can be basically looked into. And that's how you can just say that, okay, bypassing of the NAC can be basically done. Another point that you have is basically identifying the rules. Okay, so when you talk about the identifying the rules, it is always important that in any of the network, okay, understanding of the rules that is applied, okay, is going to be very, very important. However, it may not be as easy as it could be just conceived. Okay, so specifically when you are going to have an internal system which is basically hiding behind the NAT. Okay, so if you are going to implement network address translation, so several components which are there inside the network, they may be hiding behind it. So in that case, they will not be directly be accessible. So that could be basically a problematic situation. So therefore, you need to also understand how rules have been implemented. Okay, so generally things will appear to be a black box for most of the people, but if you are going to take some efforts, you may be able to get this information. Say, for example, you may be able to use the Kali, and you may be able to link to the internal network by means of the MAC filter, or you may also physically plug in any kind of a LAN cable. And you have now basically added an element to the corporate enterprise with a local IP. Okay, so if you are going to any of the organization and you find out RJ45 connection is there, you can just connect your laptop, okay, and you can get connected to the network. So this is basically adding a new network. However, if the rules have been properly being set, in that case, you may be identified, okay, during this process. So typically in Kali, okay, so you can basically get much of the information about the network. Okay, specifically, say for example, if the network is using the DHCP configuration, so automatically IP addresses might have been assigned. So immediately when you are going to connect with the RJ45 or any other connection, you can just go and type the command, maybe something like say something like say resolve.config or something like that. You will be able to get all the names, servers, and other related information. Okay, so that could be one of the things that you can basically focus on in order to get the DHCP information with the Kali Linux, which will be able to reveal the DNS entries. Now, once you have got the DNS entries, you may be going for the DNS spoofing and similar other kind of attacks. So most of the organization, what they do is that they are going to implement the DHCP. DHCP, in fact, DHCP proxy, which will basically protect themselves, because people will not be able to know the actual addresses behind the wall, because everything has to go via the proxy. So if this is the situation, in that case you can bypass this also by adding a static IP address. अगर आपको पता है कि उस ऑर्गेनाइजेशन में कौन से रेंज का IP एड्रेस DHCP रिलीज करता है, तो आप अपना ही स्टैटिक IP पहले से डाल के रख सकते हैं. So in that case, what will happen? You will become a legitimate member of that. Okay, so you will find out that in order to overcome this, many of the organizations, what they do is that they will be assigning the DHCP addresses only once your device is being authenticated through some procedure, and maybe it could be a HTTP communication, and then only things can be forwarded. However, in this kind of a situation, when you are going to have an authentication via the HTTP, there is always a possibility of capturing the packets, as a man in middle attack kind of a thing. Okay, so understanding of the rules of the network, is going to be very, very important. Okay, if you understand the rules, in that case, you can actually use it to your benefit, and you can bypass the security controls. Now, the next thing that you come and discuss is basically the exceptions. Okay, so you'll find out that many of the organizations may be having the exceptions to set of rules. Okay, so you may be having a general set of rules, but for your convenience or for your purpose, there may be exceptions which might be sent. Okay, which when they are going to be applied, they may be listed. And say, for example, if you are going to have any of the service port which is allowed to be accessing a restricted IP address. Okay, so by default, the IP addresses are basically restricted for a particular class or particular host. However, from a particular port, it may be allowed to do so. So, if, for example, it might be basically purposely fully done by some of the administrator or some of the person who is doing some specific thing. However, if somehow you know that there are exception rules that are being written, then in that case, that can be exploited, and that could be problematic in the situation. Then you are going to have quarantine rules. Okay, so you need to identify all the quarantine rules during the penetration testing, and this will give you the attacker the ability to basically circumvent the security controls which may be set by any of the organizations. So you know that how the quarantines are being happening. So if you know the rules, then in that case you may be able to bypass this quarantine also. So you may be changing either your form or signatures or something like that. You can also sometimes disable the endpoint security. In most of the organizations, generally, endpoint security is being implemented so that nobody will be able to enter into the network. So most of the endpoint securities may be having antiviruses or some kind of a predefined remedial activities. And you can basically disable these endpoint securities, and you may be able to then bypass. So if you are going to add, say, for example, a non-compliant element or the device, then in that case, it may not be able to identify and apply the rule. And therefore, you'll see that the endpoint might have been considered to be disabled, or somehow you are going to get an access to it and you go and basically disable all the security features. Then in that case, bypassing can be done by anybody and everybody. So if you are having any element which is trying to connect to the network without antivirus installed, will be automatically being quarantined, and the network or the port, okay, on the switch will be basically being disabled. This is how exactly the mechanism takes place. Now, you can also go for the preventing remediations. I just said that if you are going to have any of the endpoints, okay, वहाँ पे generally antivirus होता है. So any specific device with a valid IP address, okay, which performs a port scan may be blocked for a period of time, and the traffic may be blocked for the antivirus software also. Many of the time you'll find out that antivirus keeps on communicating and so on. Now, in order to basically deceive sometimes, okay, so you may act as an antivirus or something similar like that, and then the system may be blocking it. Then you can also add an exception. Okay, so by manually, you may be able to add some kind of exception or your own set of rules, okay, in order to have an access to remote command shell. So not standing on there, but remotely you may be able to execute something. And this can be basically done when you are going to do some kind of modification into the HKey local machine, okay, as a terminal server. And you may be able to add some of the command lines. And after this, you will be able to access the remote desktop, which may be able to bypass through the firewall. Okay, so that could be one of the things that you could actually achieve. And that's how you just see that the pre-admission NAC can be basically being looked into as bypassing the security control. So now you just see that while these are in place in order to secure it, but if you understand it and if you do some little bit of alterations or over control with this, in that case you may be able to penetrate the network. Then you have a post-admission NAC. Okay, so when I say post-admission NAC, these are going to be basically set of devices which are already authorized, and they basically reside between the user's switch and the distribution switch. Okay, so दोनों के बीच में होता है, and typically you'll find out that the protection is going to be implemented that the attacker may be able to trying to bypass this firewall and the intrusion prevention system. Okay, so you need to put the security controls in such a manner that if people are trying to bypass it, they should be getting detected. So isme you are going to have basically the various ways to look into it. Pehla hai bypassing the isolation. Okay, we understand what is isolation and what are the benefits. So if you are going to have basically the advanced host intrusion prevention, so if the endpoints is not being implemented properly, or the security configuration at the endpoint is not proper, or sometimes it might have been compromised or it might have been infected, there may be a rule to isolate the endpoint in a particular segment. Okay, so agar aapko pata chalta hai ki koi particular endpoint is not working properly, then in that case you can basically isolate them. So isolation will basically provide an attacker to exploit all the systems in the particular segment. Okay, so that can be basically also looked at as an opportunity. Then you are going to have detecting the honeypots. We understand what is honeypot. Basically, this is trying to learn some of the incoming attacks so that you are able to understand the attack patterns and so on. So you'll find many of the enterprises and the companies, they have implemented the advanced protection mechanism. Okay, wherein they will be say signposting the system and the servers that are infected, and they are routed to basically the honeypot solutions, and they will be setting up a trap. Okay, and they will be able to uncover the actual motive of the attack during that time. So honeypots are going to be basically used to, for understanding the attack pattern and its objective basically. So testers, what they do is that they will be basically able to identify the honeypot host as they typically respond to all the ports which are open. Then you can go for the bypassing the application level controls, because it is not only the hardware level, okay, that you are going to talk about. You need to also look into the application level, specifically when you are talking about the ISO OSI model. So different types of application may have different requirement and different way of working, and their security controls can be basically bypassed therein. So if you are going to have an application control, okay, so you may be able to bypass them very simply after exploitation of these applications. So you may have multiple application level controls which may be placed in those applications, and one by one you can basically remove them. So one way of doing that is basically you can do the tunneling and specifically pass client side firewall using the SSH. So one of the important thing that you can see here is that you can just add yourself to the internal network and try to see that how to tunnel, okay, through this firewall using the SSH. If you are able to tunnel through this, you may be able to bypass everything, because everything which goes through the tunnel may not be basically tested except at the endpoints. Okay, so you will see that there may be various ways of putting these things in order to circumvent all the security controls which are in place. One way of doing things is that you may be looking after, say, inbound to outbound kind of a control. So if you are looking from the internal network point of view, and we understand that if all the ports are going to be blocked at the firewall level, then nothing can be going from inside to outside. But however, since you are going to be working in the network, you cannot block everything. Usually what will happen is that port number 80 and port number 443 might be kept open, and that means that insider will be able to access the internet, okay, or data transfer from the outside, okay, even within from the corporate network. So as an attacker, you will see that you will be able to utilize some of the tools, okay, which is available in Kali Linux, in order to directly bypass this SSH services over the 443 ports. Okay, so generally 80 nahi hum use karenge, but 443 we may be able to use that. So basically, as far as the company is concerned, this is going to be everything which is originating from the internal to the organization, and therefore it may not be basically looking forward to it. So after once you use your Kali and Linux, then that is you may be able to communicate, okay, with the internal network from the external cloud and vice versa. Another aspect is basically bypassing the URL filtering mechanism. Okay, so you can basically utilize any of these existing SSH connections and port forwarding techniques in order to bypass any restrictions which may be set by the security policy or any kind of special device in place. Okay, so you'll see that if you are able to do that, then in that case you may be even able to bypass any of the tunneling that is happening, or through the tunneling you may be able to bypass these kind of security controls. Then if you look after the outbound to inbound, you'll see that it is just an opposite way of the previous one. So if you want to establish any kind of a stable connection from the external to internal network, a tunnel must be established using the SSH, that is secure shell. So what happens is that as far as the Kali is concerned, Kali machine may be connected to the internal LAN that has basically a valid IP address. And then you can just fire a command which will facilitate to create a tunnel from inside the network to the outside. Now, prior to running this kind of a command, okay, you need to ensure that change in the SSH configuration has been done so that it cannot be caught. So you may be able to log in from the internal network to the Kali Linux onto the cloud machine, and then you can open up a particular port on the local host to forward the SSH. And once you are done, in that case, you may be able to get an access, and you may be able to communicate as a legitimate user. However, you'll say that you are bypassing all the security controls in place. Then bypassing the antivirus with files. Okay, so that is another important thing that you can actually do. So specifically when you're going to have exploitation phase of the cyber kill chain, this is going to be one of the most dangerous for the penetration testers or even the attackers, as they may be directly interacting with the target network system, and there is always going to be a high chance that you may be getting detected, because whatever activity you are going to do, they are going to be logged, and therefore their identities can be revealed. So what you can do is that you can apply the stealth technique in order to minimize the risk of getting identified. However, you'll see that there are no specific method or the tool which is not going to be detectable. Only thing is that some configuration changes can be done so that there is going to be minimal chances of getting recognized. So when you are basically considering any of the remote exploits, most networks and the system basically apply various different types of defensive controls in order to minimize the risk of the attack. So if you have routers, you have firewalls, you have intrusion detection and prevention systems, you have malware detection software. So they may be basically trying to identify this kind of attacks. So if you want to basically facilitate the exploitation, okay, so most of the framework, what they do is that they have got certain features which make the attack somewhat stealthy. So one such thing is basically the Metasploit framework. Okay, and Metasploit framework can help you to avoid or you say evade, okay, these security controls, and therefore in many of the cases you'll say the Metasploit framework is basically being used. Then if you see that, you may also say that as far as the Metasploit is concerned, Metasploit can be basically used in coordination with other type of security controls, and that may be helping you to basically identify all the vulnerabilities and any kind of opportunities that can be bypassed. Okay, they may be listed, and with other tools you may be able to go through and get it. So that's what you say that the Metasploit Pro can be used. As far as the Metasploit Pro is concerned, this is integrated into Kali Linux, and in the community edition you will see that it is freely available. Now it has got several features, okay, which will be helping you to bypass the intrusion detection system. I'm assuming that most of the organizations, they are having the ideas in place. So what it can do, it can help you to do the scanning, okay, and it can be adjusted in the discovery scan setting, and it can help you to reduce the speed of the interaction with the target by setting the speed to some typical value, and therefore you'll find out the chances of getting the detection may be minimized. What does this do is that it implements a transport evasion by sending a smaller TCP packet and increasing the transmission between the packets. Okay, so if you are going to have a smaller TCP packets, in that case, okay, that solves our purpose. This is going to reduce the number of simultaneous exploit launch against the target system, and there are basically application specific evasion options for the exploits. Okay, and this include basically the HTTP, SMB, etc., and so on. So basically, you'll see that SMB, okay, is also being used in order to attack the system. So as far as the antiviruses are concerned, you'll find that most of the antiviruses basically they rely on to the signature matching, okay, to locate the virus. However, in some cases, you'll find out if the signature is very complex or it is very new, it may not be identified. Even for the ransomware on any of the kind of malware, you'll say signature identification is the most common type of things. So you may be able to examine each of the executables for the strings of known signatures of the viruses, and you may be able to create an alarm if you find out any of the payloads with those signatures. So if this is the general security mechanism that is being implemented, so what you can do is that you can use the Metasploit framework, okay, which basically allows you to have standalone executable to be encoded in such a manner that you may be able to bypass the detection. So even if somebody looks into the payload, he will not be able to identify those signatures because this is going to be coded in such a manner. So Metasploit framework, and together with other things, it can be basically used to generate such kind of things, okay, which will be helping you to bypass. And there are basically two things that can come to help to you here in this case. You are going to have something called as a veil, and you are going to have the shelter. Okay, so these are the two things that you can use, which can basically help you to bypass the antivirus software by cross-verifying the executable by uploading them directly to VirusTotal बिफोर प्लांटिंग द बैकडोर इनटू द टारगेट एनवायरनमेंट. ओके, सो ये टूल्स यूज करके आप इस तरीके से एग्जीक्यूटेबल जनरेट कर सकते हैं कि जो डिटेक्ट नहीं हो. सो इन दैट केस, इन ऑर्डर टू वेरीफाई दैट यू विल बी एबल टू bypass, you can upload it into the VirusTotal, and if VirusTotal gives a clean sheet to this, in that case you can integrate within your network. Now you will be able to bypass all the security controls that are in place. Now, as far as the Whale is concerned and Shelter are concerned, they are good standards, okay, as far as the bypassing of the security control is concerned. Now, looking into the Whale framework, you will find out that this is basically a antivirus evasion framework, and it provides a very effective protection against and detection of any of the standalone exploits for the endpoints and the server. Now, this framework is not basically supported by its original creator, but still it is available into the Kali, and it can be implemented. Now, if you see that this framework basically consists of two important things. One is called as an evasion, another is going to be ordnance. So you can basically install this Whale in the terminal by simply typing the command, say sudo apt install Whale, and it will be installed. Now, as far as the Whale is concerned, Whale has got number of features that makes it quite popular. And as far as the evasion is concerned, evasion is going to aggregate the various techniques into the framework, which is basically simplified management. And as far as the ordnance was concerned, they generate the shellcode for the supported payloads to further create new exploits. Now, as far as the framework is concerned, it incorporates a custom shellcode, as I just told you, in variety of programming languages, including the C, C++, Hash, and you have Python. It can basically use the Metasploit generated shellcode for creating your own ordnance in order to basically generate the shellcode for supported payloads. You may be able to integrate the third-party tools. Say, for example, you have got Hyperons, then you have got Backdoor Factory, etc. It can be basically generated into, say, PS execute, or you have Python or .exe calls. You can basically reuse these shell codes, okay, and implement their own encryption methods. Its functionality can also be scripted to automatic deployment. So basically, as far as the Whale is concerned, you may be able to generate the payload. Okay, standalone payload may be including several features which can be sent to the VirusTotal and then can be checked. Okay, and once the payload has been created, they can be delivered to the target in number of ways. One is the uploading and executing them using the impact and the PTS toolkit, and then you are going to have another invocation methods also. So if you look at the downside, okay, so this is basically giving you an example of a Whale evasion option. Okay, so Whale is going to basically present an interface to the user for choosing the various options that he can select from. So basically, there is going to be two tools that is available. You have got a number of payload modules that are loaded, as well as the Whale commands. Okay, so if you are going to just type use evasion, you will be able to get this tool, and you can also use the list command in order to see the available payloads. So आपके पास ये इस तरीके का इंटरफेस आपको दिखाई देता है. Now you can just also see that it basically presents you that there may be several say payloads that may be there. So now in order to see the payloads, you can just see onto the screen that it may be listing down the various payloads. So in all total, अगर आप देखा जाए तो इसमें around 41 payloads are going to be there. And once these payloads are being loaded, okay, then in that case, you may be getting an options through in order to choose from the Ordnance, MS Venom, and other things. And once you choose, okay, Metasploit payload option in the Whale evasion, the second screen will look like. And then successfully creating a file with the payload, okay, can be done following the whatever options are being given. Idea of discussing this is that if you are going to use these tools at that end, you will be able to create a payload, okay, which can be basically tested for whether it is being detected or it is not being detected. So basically, you will see that you are trying to test your capability of generating the fabricated payloads, okay, and then trying to identify them. Okay, then you are going to have the another one, that is the shelter. As far as the shelter is concerned, this is another antivirus evasion tool that is that infects the piece dynamically, and it is used to inject the shellcode into the 32-bit native Windows application. And basically what it does is that it allows the attacker to customize the payload or utilize the Metasploit framework. आप अपना खुद का कर सकते हैं या फिर Metasploit framework use कर सकते हैं. Most of the antiviruses may not be able to identify the malicious executable depending upon how the attackers have recoded them. Okay, and recoding can be done in number of endless signatures. So you are basically trying to modify or recode those signatures. And as far as the installation is concerned, you can just fire the command like sudo apt get install shelter in the terminal, and things will be getting installed, and you will be getting basically the shelter screen. Okay, so when you are going to basically type this sudo shelter, you will be able to get this screen. Now, once this shelter is launched, then typical steps need to be followed in order to create a malicious executable. Typically, what attacker will be doing is that attacker should be given the option to select. Okay, so you have got auto or manual or something like that. इस तरीके का आपके पास screen आता है, and then next step is to provide the target file, and attacker can choose any of these. It could be an exe file or it could be anything else which may be there. And once this target file location is provided, the shelter will be able to basically disassemble the file. And once disassembling has been done, then the shelter will provide the option to basically enable the stealth mode so that it cannot be detected. So typically, following the stealth mode selection, we will be able to inject the listed payload into the same PE file. And once that is being done, then in that case, you may be utilizing the other things like, say, meter-pitter, say, reverse HTTPS, and provide the L host and L port, okay, for the same. Now, once all the required information is fed into this shelter, at the same time, the PE file is going to be provided input. Provided input is now going to be injected with the payload, and the injection is going to be complete. Now, once this executable is delivered to the victim, attacker will now be able to open the listener as per the payload, and you can just specify the local host and the local port accordingly. So you can just type the commands accordingly, and you may be able to get the required payload generation. So this is what is entirely scenario. This is the selecting the payload options in the shelter. Okay, so I just said that meter-pitter आपके पास reverse TCP है, HTTP है, HTTPS है, and so on. Okay, then you will be successfully setting up the payload options, and then after the shell main menu from the Kali Linux, and then you will be able to fire some of these commands. Okay, so specifically say use exploit multi-handler and then set payload Windows, meter-pitter, HTTPS, and L host and L port, and then other options. So you can just basically save this list of commands, okay, to some of the files, and then run it using the Metasploit by using the MS control console. And once the system opens, you'll see that it will open without being blocked by the antivirus or any security control. If you are trying to run anything, by default, the Windows will be blocking it, and it will be saying that the file is dangerous or something like that. Do you want to really open or so? In this case, it will be able to bypass such kind of pop-ups, and it should basically open the shell to the attacker IP without any kind of trouble. So once you are getting the shell, okay, so specifically the shelter main menu from the Kali Linux that you see, okay, that may be basically open, and then in that case you will be able to create a backdoor and plant it into the then you will be able to plant it into the victim's system. So most of the majority of antiviruses will be able to capture the reverse meter-pitter shell. However, it is recommended that the penetration testers can encode multiple times before dropping the exploit. तो आप थोड़ा पहले multiple trials कीजिए, and then finally get to the version which cannot be basically detected. Then bypassing the Windows operating system controls, okay, because Windows is a popular operating system, so therefore people will also be behind bypassing the security controls. Now, as far as the Windows is concerned, it has got several mechanisms in order to place the security, okay, including the one that is any unsigned applications may not be run, protection of the programs, protection of the memory places, and many other things. Okay, so in any of the environment, you'll find out endpoint is provided to the user, and all authentication may be happening at the endpoint itself. Okay, so as far as the exploitation is concerned, okay, Windows exploitation probability is comparatively much higher. Now, as far as the Windows systems are concerned, okay, so you may be able to do it in a number of ways. You understand that you have got user account controls. Okay, so user account control will try to put some kind of a control so that only authorized users may be able to access, and you may be able to deal with the system and alter the system. So now generally what happens is that because of this user account controls, there will be some privilege settings that may be done. With this privilege settings, what they will be doing is that they will be trying to have number of features, which includes a always notify kind of a thing, okay, which says that anything is going to happen immediately, it will be prompting the local user about it. You may be able to have a setting like notify only when the program makes the changes to the computer, or notify when the program tries to make changes to the computer, okay, and other thing is that never notify kind of a thing. So ये सारी settings हो सकती है, and in fact you can go and change this setting also, and you may be able to bypass the controls. So typically immediately after the exploitation, what happens is that the tester wants to know two things. Okay, so अगर आपने exploit किया है तो आप ये जानना चाहते हैं कि who is the user that the system has identified, and what rights that they have, okay, onto the system. So if you see that you have done something and system identifies you as some user, so associated with you will be also getting the rights, and when you have the knowledge of that rights, then that case you may be able to do the further attacks. So typically, in order to identify them, what you can do is that you can just simply type command, say who is and slash group, or who am I slash group, and you will be getting all the required informations. Now, you will just see that this is the typical screen that you will be getting, specifically when you are going to use the Metasploit and you want to escalate the privilege using the exploits from the Metasploit. Now, if you are an attacker, okay, if you are going to be assuming as an attacker, you will see that you will be having a limited shell from the shelter or the well exploit. And the first option is going to be basically to elevate the privileges. Okay, and in order to elevate the privileges, we will be running this, okay, exploit Windows local and ask, okay, from the Metasploit. And this will basically launch the run as attack. Okay, so run as attack, this will basically create an executable that when invoked will run the program on the request with the elevated right or an increased right. Now the executables would be created, okay, say for example exe, with a custom option or encrypted using the Whale framework, or this will basically help you to avoid detection by any of the local antiviruses. Now, as far as the run is concerned, it may have a disadvantage that the user may be prompted that the program from an unknown publisher wants to make the changes to the computer. Now, this alert may cause some kind of an escalation to be identified, okay, and then people may become vigilant. So, if you are a member of the administrator groups, and if your user access control is set to default, say for example, notify me only when the program tries to make two changes to the computer, okay, typically an attacker will be able to use the Metasploit, okay, module, okay, that is the bypass authentication in order to escalate the privileges. Okay, so that can be basically done, and then you may be able to get an access to the limited shell and the Metasploit. Then the next one, you are going to have basically using the FOD helper to bypass user account control in Windows 10. Now, as far as the FOD-helper.exe is concerned, this is an executable file which is used by the Windows to manage the features in the Windows setting. And if the attacker has got a limited shell or normal user access for the victim system, then he can basically make use of the FOD-helper.exe in order to bypass this user account access control. So usually when this is going to be done, the testers have to be knowing this, that the Microsoft Defender, okay, real-time monitoring may be able to identify it. So therefore you have to disable it. Okay. So bypassing the user say UAC can be basically achieved by running a typical command in the Windows PowerShell. Okay. So we are saying the not on the common command prompt, but rather than using the PowerShell. So this will take an advantage of being trusted binary in the Windows system. And this will allow the escalation without requiring any kind of a UAC prompt with most of the settings. Okay, so this is how exactly you will be able to do that. So on the right hand side, you can just say win object, win32 user account, and then filters you have set. So this screen can be basically used. So once this is being done, okay, so this is what is nothing but the manual FOD-helper UAC bypass that is being shown. So once this can be achieved, okay, you can, or you can say that this can be basically achieved by simply running the single PowerShell script. Okay, so you can write things as a script and you can just run them. And if you are going to use the HTTP web server, okay, which is hosted by the attacker, then it can be just very easily being done. You can just bypass things by downloading the bypass script, and then you can just fire commands like sudo service apt and start, and then you can just get the bypassing. So you will see that you may be able to bypass the controls using the FOD-helper.exe, and you can write this script and multiple times you can run on multiple machines also. Okay, another type of control that you are going to have is basically most of the Windows provide the disk cleanup feature to in order to maintain the performance of the machine. Now the same thing can be basically used to bypass the security controls also. Now in this kind of an attack, we will be basically using the disk cleanup, which is basically a Windows utility designed to free up the space. Default scheduled task on this Windows system, okay, reveals that there's a task named called as silent cleanup, okay, which will execute the disk cleanup process. And this cleanup process is basically clearmanager.exe, and this clearmanager.exe has got the highest privileges, and even if it is going to be executed by the unprivileged user. So therefore you will see that being an unprivileged user, you will be able to execute a privileged command. So now what happens is that when you're going to run this command, it is going to create a temporary folder, okay, and which is called as a GUID, and it will be copying the executables and the various DLLs into it. Now, once this executable is going to be launched, it will start loading the DLLs in the certain folder. Okay, and therefore you can see that this opportunity can be basically used in order to overcome the security controls also. Now, as far as the Defender is concerned, they may be offering you the real-time monitoring, but this exploit might work while and it may be able to bypass this also. The next thing that you have is basically obfuscating the PowerShell and using the fileless technique. Now, specifically in the recent version of the Windows, you'll find out that we may be able to implement the endpoint security defense mechanism and real-time monitoring. Okay, specifically, you'll find out that by placing a lot of limitations on the existing attacking tools. So you'll find out that there are always going to be newer ways to bypass any of the security controls that you have. One thing is that you have a PI obfuscation tool. That is one tool which is basically written into the Python 3 and has got an ability to replace all the functions name, variables, parameters, which is given in the Python PowerShell script. Now, this can be basically obtained from the Git repository. You can directly download it from the Git repository as it is shown. Sudo git clone and https PI obfuscation cd bifurcation. So you will be able to go into the directory. And once you are done with that, okay, so you will be ready to use it. So you can now utilize the Nishank PowerShell script to obfuscate the payload. And then you'll just see that once the script is being run, and you can basically save them as a file also. The snippet of the screen is what is it, script is basically shown here. Okay, there you have right warning, something went wrong, check if the server is reachable or something like that. Okay, so you can just write whatever you want to do, any kind of edits you want to do. Okay, so you may be able to edit the invoke PowerShell TCP dot say PS1 contents, and this can be done as per your wish. So finally, what you will be able to do, you will be able to basically obfuscate the PowerShell scripts that we have just edited. Okay, with the py fuscation by running typically this command like sudo python 3 pyfuscation.py and with some of the parameters. Okay, so you will be finally able to see the PowerShell script functions, variables, parameters that have now been replaced with a new folder and a new file name and everything. So then everything gets changed. So in that case, detecting them is going to be difficult. So once the file is successfully updated, we may be able to change our directory to the output folder and then rename the file to some other simpler calls from the target system. And we will be basically hosting the web server using the Python module, and then you can just start using them. Now, once your target Windows machine is there, okay, you may be simply running the wget command and from the PowerShell, and then you will be able to see that the script will be ready to be scanned by the antivirus software. And you will see that it may not be basically able to detect them, and you may be able to bypass them. Okay, so usually by Microsoft Defender should be able to identify, but in that case, it can be basically bypassed. So as a last step, you'll see that once the script is delivered to the target, attacker can now open the port for the target to connect to it. And in our case, we just said 443 port was basically used in the initial port, in the initial payload. And on this PowerShell script is going to be run either by opening it into the PowerShell or by running it. Okay, it should be able to direct the reverse shell to the attacker without any kind of an antivirus or EDR blocking it. So you will be able to bypass any of the antivirus detection. The next thing that you are going to have is basically the other Windows specific operating system controls. So you'll see that as far as the operating system is concerned, we may be able to have an access and authorization and encryption, system security, communication security, and audit and logging. So these are going to be Windows specific operating system controls that are put in place in order to safeguard your information and the assets. So talking about the access authentication, अगर आप बात करें, so in that case, this access authentication is access and authorization is one of the very important features of Windows. Okay, so anybody cannot access unless and until they are valid user, and any of the users will be having a specific type of right what they can do with any of these assets. So most of the exploitations are going to be performed on the access and the authorization section of the security control in order to basically gain the access to the system and perform unauthorized activities. So what you will be able to do is basically secure channel data is going to be implemented in Windows. And attackers are mostly successful in bypassing the encryption either by using the weak cipher suite or disabling the feature itself. या तो आप ये encryption के features को disable कर दीजिए या फिर ciphering suite use करके you can just break into the system. Next one is basically the security, system security, which is basically revolving around the main local system level exploitation and controls that are in place to initiate the bypass. Okay, so you may be going forward for the time zone synchronization, page file creation, okay, and loading and unloading of the device driver and the firmware environment values, automatic administration of the logon enabled for all the users. These are some of the things that you may be concerned with. As far as the communication security is concerned, typically in communication security, the majority of the additional network devices are in place. But with respect to Windows digitally signed certificates and this service principal name, the target name validation is one of the notable things that the penetration testers could utilize to develop a custom exploit. So you can basically go for the communication security aspect also, and you can try to bypass them. Then audit and logging is another important feature of most of the Windows environment, which can basically help you to identify any kind of an unexpected and unwanted things that is happening onto this system. Okay, so typically the list of logs, okay, can be produced, and the organization or the enterprises may be enabling this logs, okay, and this logs can be utilized to provide the information about the incident or during the forensic analysis. But at the same time, you'll find out it will also give you an opportunity to understand, okay, what is happening, how things are being stored. So therefore, the same thing can also be used to bypass in near future so that you are not getting detected. So some of them basically includes like so auditing and logging में अगर बात करें तो credential validations के बारे में बात हो सकता है, account management के बारे में बात हो सकता है, then you have a process creation, storage removal, policy changes, everything. तो जो भी कुछ आपके सिस्टम पे होता है उसका log आप generate करते हैं, and in that case you can go for the auditing of this logs also. Okay, so with all these kind of things, okay, so you will find out that you will be in a place basically to give an attempt to bypass the system security or the security controls which are in place onto the Windows system. Okay, so by and large, what we have just discussed is that we have looked into that bypassing of the security control onto the system or the network is very much possible. Okay, with either some of the sophisticated mechanisms or using some sophisticated tools which may be available. Say, for example, in Linux, okay, there are several, or Kali Linux, there are several tools that can be used to achieve them. Okay, now let us move ahead and just give some examples of the Kali Linux. Last time we have discussed about the servers. Okay, so when you are talking about the servers, you will see, just a second. You'll just see that on the servers, okay, there will be multiple things that you need to be concerned about. पहली चीज है कि वहां पे servers पे you may be having an application server, okay, although other things might be put in proper place, okay, but there is always a likelihood that the application that are residing onto the server may not be I can say that may be configured well, okay, and therefore they may become an possible exploit. Okay, so let us just try to discuss about the application servers. Okay, so just a second. Okay, so in continuation with our discussions last time, okay, when we have discussed about the web and the cloud, okay, securities. Okay, so when you are talking about the exploitation of the web-based application, you'll find out that we are generally most commonly focusing on to the common attacks, generally in most of the cases like routes to the website, web-based application, and the web services. So as a penetration tester and an attacker, these web applications are going to be exposing the backend services onto the network, the client side activities of the users which are who are accessing the websites, and the connections between the users and the web application services of or the data. So basically, as an attacker, you will have a primary perspective to look into the web application, their functioning, their services, and how the client side exploitation can be done. So typically, web application hacking has a very systematic and methodological approach. Okay, as shown on to the right hand side of the diagram. Okay, so you just see that it has got mainly say 6 stages. Okay, so 6 stages हैं आपके यहाँ पे which is nothing but setting the target, spider, enumeration, vulnerability scanning, exploitation, covering track, and maintaining access. As far as the setting of the target is concerned, okay, so you need to set the right target during the penetration testing, and then you will be able to focus more on specific vulnerable systems in order to gain the system level access or okay, what is a exploit the most prominent features of that system. Spider and enumerate अगर आप बात करें तो in that case attackers must have identified the list of web application by now, and they are trying to dig deeper into the specific type of technology versions and their relevant vulnerabilities. So multiple methods may be used to spider all the web pages and identify the technology and find everything relevant to go for the next stage. Vulnerability assessment or vulnerability scanning जब आप बात करते हैं तो all the known vulnerabilities are going to be identified and collected, and using the well-known vulnerability database this can be done, and you will be able to get to know the public exploits or commonly known security misconfigurations. Then exploitation is basically going to allow the penetration testers to exploit the known and unknown vulnerabilities, including the business logic of the application. Okay, so for example, if you are going to have an application which is vulnerable to admin interface exposure, attackers can try to gain the access to the interface by performing various different types of attack, such as a password guessing or brute forcing or exploiting the admin interface vulnerability itself. Okay, and then in that case, they may be able to run the remote web shells or command directly using what is a and exposed API in that case. Then covering track, as we have already discussed during the hacking life cycle. Okay, then what they are trying to do is that they are trying to erase all the evidences of the hack while going, so that nobody will be able to know that who has come and what they have done. As an example, you can just say system might be compromised by file upload vulnerability, and remote commands were executed onto the server. Then in this case, what will happen is that attacker will try to attempt to clear the application server logs, because application server logs might be storing that if the file has been uploaded or something like that, or web server logs are clear kar sakte, system log clear kar sakte, or any other kind of logs can be clear. So once these tracks are going to be covered, okay, attacker can ensure that there is no log left, and which will be revealing his identity. Then maintaining access, attacker may be able to potentially plant a backdoor and also go on to the platform privilege escalation, or the user use the systems as a zombie in order to perform more focused internal attack. So basically, we want that in future also. Again, if I want to have an access, in that case, I will be placing the backdoor or something similar to that, so that you are able to access it in future also. So if you just see that the web application hacking map mind, okay, so it can be done at the two levels, server side and you have the client side. Okay, server side के बारे में हमने काफी हद तक डिस्कस किया था. अगर जिसके अंदर आपको इंजेक्शन फ्लॉज आता है, फाइल इंक्लूजन आता है, रिमोट एग्जीक्यूशन होता है, डायरेक्टरी पाथ ट्रैवर्सल है, सेशन मैनेजमेंट है, बिजनेस लॉजिक इंप्लीमेंटेशन फ्लॉज है, इंफॉर्मेशन डिस्क्लोजर है, वेब सर्विसेज एंड मिडलवेयर मिसकॉन्फिगरेशन, शेयर्ड इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर आता है. क्लाइंट साइड में आपके पास ब्राउजर एक्सप्लॉइट्स है, नेटवर्क एक्सप्लॉइट है, एंड क्रॉस साइड स्क्रिप्टिंग है. सो दीज आर सम ऑफ द important types of the exploits that you are going to have at the client side. Now the client side attacks basically target the system that typically lack the security control. Specifically, there may not be any kind of a firewall or intrusion detection system or endpoint security. Okay, so in this case, you can just attack these systems. In fact, many of the time browser compromise can happen because through the browser you are trying to access everything and the data is getting transferred. So if these attacks are successful and persistent communication is going to be established, then the client devices can be used to launch attack if it is reattached to the target. And these attacks are really focused on exploiting the vulnerabilities that exist on the client side rather than on the server side. Okay, and this may include, as I just told you, the browser or the applications which are running onto that, and the network that you are having, including the thin client and the thick clients that you have. If you see that there may be some browsers which may be more vulnerable. Okay, say for example, Internet Explorer vulnerabilities. Okay, so Explorer has a known vulnerability, near about 2,000 vulnerabilities are being there. Okay, which are already listed on to the portals, and people can basically look for that and they can exploit them. You may also have JavaScript and Java vulnerabilities. Okay, they are scripting languages, so that is through that also attacks can happen. DNS pinning and rebinding vulnerability is another type of vulnerability that you may be able to have, and so on. So as far as the what I say web application hacking is concerned, okay, not only the server but also the client side is going to be an opportunity for you, okay, in order to attack any system. Then we talk about the recurrence of the web app. Okay, so we just basically want to get as much as information about the web application. If you, the more the information you are going to have, the more the chances that you are going to find out the way to, in order to compromise or exploit these web applications, either for confidentiality loss, availability loss, integrity loss, or whatever you want to basically do. So you will just see that there may be quite complexity that may be included on these web apps. Okay, and that needs to be overtaken, okay, or has to be taken into account. It includes basically the network architectures, the platform architectures, application and middleware services that you are going to have, authentication and authorization processes that are going to be there, the business logic is going to be there, our client interactions are going to be there. So if you understand what is the complexity of these web services, then that is, as a penetration tester, you may be able to adapt to each of the specific architecture and the services parameter, and you can customize your attack. So at the same time, you'll find the testing process must be applied consistently in order to ensure that nothing is going to be missed and you're not getting detected. So now there are various different types of methodologies that are being suggested, and you will find out that one of the widely accepted one is basically called as OWASP, that is Open Web Application Security Project. And this is basically listing down the most of the vulnerabilities that have been identified. And if you want to get the top 10 vulnerabilities, you can just look into the OWASP top 10. Okay, so this is going to be minimum standard that will provide the direction to the testers that what need to be looked into, what need to be tested, and so on. So usually you will be focusing on to top some 10, 15, whatever it is there, as far as the testing is concerned. However, you need to do as exhaustive as possible. So now if you are going to use the cyber kill chain approach, so typical activities which is specific to web application recurrence can be done, which include the identifying the target web app, specifically with regards to where and how it is hosted, then enumerating the site directory structure and the files of the target site, okay, which will include determining whether the content management system is in use. Say for example, agar WordPress Joomla aisa kuch kar raha hai, so you can just exploit those vulnerabilities. Identifying the authentication and authorization mechanism, and it will help you decide how the session state is being maintained during the transaction with that web service. So this will usually invoke any kind of analysis, okay, including of the cookies and how they are used, utilizing the proxy tool. Then enumerating all the forms. Okay, so they are going to be primary means to collect information about the client input. Okay, so I can just look for those things, and I may be also able to perform the SQL or XML or JSON injection attacks. Then we can go for identifying other areas of the ways to accept the inputs, okay, such as the pages which allow the file upload, okay, or any restrictions on the accepted upload types. Okay, यहाँ से भी आपका interaction होता है, वो भी आप समझ सकते हैं. You can also identify how errors are handled. So mechanism of error handling will also reveal much of the things, and in that case, these can be used by the attacker in order to devise his strategy. So in particular, what we want to do is that we want to ensure that the hosted sites are identified, and then the DNS mapping is being done in order to identify all the hosted sites that are delivered by the same server. One the common and successful means of attack is conceptualized. We attack basically a target, non-target and target site hosted onto the same physical server as a target website, and exploit the weaknesses into the server in order to gain the root access, and then escalation of the privilege and other things will be happening. Then you can basically go for detection of the web application firewall and load balancers. We understand that these are some of the very important features of these servers. Okay, so they want to implement the load balancing and web application firewalls. They are going to be placed into it. Okay, so this is one of the common practices. So if you are going to have a firewall being used, the tester need to ensure that the attacks, specifically those that rely on to the crafted input, okay, they are encoded in such a manner that they can be bypassed by the firewalls, okay, or the web application firewall. Now, as far as the WAF is concerned, they can be identified manually by inspecting the cookies, okay, or by changing the header information. And if you just see that the process of WAF description can be automated by using the nmap utility, that is nmap script आप लिख सकते हैं और उसके बाद आप detect कर सकते हैं. Okay, so that is what is basically shown. Okay, onto the right hand side you have sudo nmap and some options, and you can just see that. So basically this nmap script, what it does is it helps you to identify the WAF which is present. However, the testing of the script has demonstrated that it is not always accurate in its finding, and the return data may be quite too general, and therefore you need to have an additional mechanism in order to get more information. Now you can basically use this script, okay, as an automation tool in order to identify and fingerprint the web-based firewalls, and testing has to be determined that it is most accurate for tool for the same. Okay, so that is what you can basically do that. And as far as the load balancing is concerned, you can use the load balance detector, which is basically a bash shell script that determines whether the domain uses the DNS or HTTP balancing. So if you have such kind of information, so you will see that, okay, you will be in a position to basically streamline your attacks. Okay, and this important information from the perspective of the tester can be seamlessly being used, okay, in order to test the server, and then forward the request to possibly a different server or something like that based on the results that you are going to have. Then next is the fingerprinting of the web application and CMS. Okay, so web application filtering is nothing but the first of the primary task that a penetration tester is going to perform. What it does is basically tries to find out the version and the type of the running web server and the web technology that it is implemented. If you know that what is the server and what is the technology it is using, so in that case you can have a seer phishing attack, or you can have a focus attack around that. These basically allow the attackers to determine the known vulnerabilities and the appropriate exploits. Now, attacker can basically utilize typically the command line tools, which will have the capability to connect to the remote host. Say for example, आपके पास typical tool है netcat. Okay, netcat command can be used to connect to the victim host on a typical port, which may be a 8080 port or 80 port, and it can issue the HTTP head command in order to identify what kind of is being run onto the server. Okay, so that's how you just say that you can basically use it for banner grabbing. And जो आपको यहाँ दिख रहा है, आपको banner grabbing दिख रहा है, जिसमें आपको head दिख रहा है, HTTP 1.1 दिख रहा है, okay, and other kind of things. Okay, so you will be able to see some of the informations that is going to be there. Now, ultimately, what is the goal is to basically obtain the sensitive information. Now, the websites should be inspected in order to determine the CMS that has been used to build and maintain it. So, for example, कुछ लोग WordPress use करते हैं, कोई Drupal use करता है, कोई Joomla use करता है, and so on. So, Drupal and Joomla and WordPress, they are also vulnerable to this kind of CMS attacks that you have if they have not been configured properly. Now, as far as Kali is concerned, Kali includes automatic scanners, okay, automatic scanners like WP Scan. Okay, so that can be basically used, which will help you to fingerprint a WordPress CMS to determine the version information. Okay, so you can just see that, okay, you are having the fingerprinting of a WordPress and scanning using the WP Scan. Now, one particular scanning tool, okay, is also called as a automated web crawler. It can be basically used to get the information that has already been gathered, as well as determine the existing directory and the file structure of a particular site. So typically, the finding of these web crawlers will include the administrative portals, configuration files, and what is a that may be basically containing the hard-coded credential access and information on the internal structure, backup copies of the website, administrators' notes, and other personal information and the source code that is going to be there. So now, if you are having all this information, then in that case, you may be in a better position to exploit them much better way. So as far as the Kali is concerned, there are several web crawlers that can be used for the purpose. You have Buzzsuit Community Edition, you have DIR Busters, you have Zap, you have Derb, you have got WFs, then you have the Kuti Capt, and many more. Now, out of this, इसमें से अगर Dirt Buster आप देखें, then that this is another important tool, which is basically GUI based tool, which helps you to list possible directories and the files to perform brute force attack of the website structure. So responses can be viewed as a list of or the tree format, okay, which will reflect the entire website structure. Okay, so you will just see that this is how it will look like, and you can just see that index.jsp, login.jsp, and something पूरा directory structure आप यहाँ पे reveal कर सकते हैं. Okay, so you will just see that this is basically running off OS DIR Buster in order to enumerate all valid files onto the target web application. Now, going further to this, you can basically also do the mirroring of the website from the command line. So Kali has got inbuilt feature in order to mirror. Mirror means basically trying to clone the entire website. So if you clone the website onto the local repository, later on you can do the offline analysis to your fullest of the time, and then you can get much of the information. Okay, so this is basically nothing but copying the website directly to the tester's location or your local place. Okay, and this will help you to review the entire directory structure and the contents, extract any kind of metadata, and use the contents in order to further investigate into anything. And the same thing can be used to further attack the typical website by exploring the vulnerabilities that you are going to do there. So once you have mapped out the basic structure of the website and web services that are being delivered, the next stage is going to be in the kill chain is to identify the vulnerabilities that can be exploited from this. Okay, so basically you'll see that as far as the Kali Linux is concerned, okay, so this is not going to be pre-installed. You can install it by firing command like sudo apt install htttrack. Okay, so htttrack जो है ये एक आपका टूल है जो आपको वेबसाइट क्लोनिंग या मिररिंग के लिए हेल्प करता है. And there may be several options that you may have. Okay, so as a penetration you tester, you can just download this from the website and you can just use it. Now, once this htttrack is complete, okay, the tester will be able to load the application locally and harvest the information, identify any kind of hard-coded credentials into the HTML files or the backup files, or identify any kind of design and implementation flaws that may exist onto the websites. Okay, so you will be able to get the entire clone of the things, or you'll be getting all the information about the websites. Another one is the client-side proxy. We understand that what is proxy. Proxy is going to be acting like just like a server. All the requests will be going via them. While it is going to be one way of implementing the security control, this can also be by if this client-server proxy is being compromised, then in that case it will lead to the compromise of the entire network which is dealing with it. So typically a client-side proxy intercepts the HTTP and HTTPS traffic. This will allow the penetration tester to examine any communication that is happening between the user and any of the application. So therefore, as a tester, you will be able to copy the data or interact with the requests that are made to the application, and therefore you will be able to manipulate or bypass the client-side restrictions also. Okay, so at this place you can do that. As far as the client-side proxies are concerned, they were primarily designed for debugging the application, but the same functionality can be abused or used by the attacker in order to perform something like a man in the middle attack or man in the browser attack and kind of thing, because everything what is going to go through, it is going to go through only with this proxy. There's a tool called as a burp proxy, another one, okay, that is going to work onto the similar idea. Okay, so this is basically what is the output of the burp proxy, which is basically talking about the HTTP packets that you can see. Okay, so this is basically a part of the larger suite, and which has got several functions. You will be able to see that this is going to be application aware, so you know that what kind of application is there. You may be using it as a vulnerability scanner, okay, as an intrusion tool, or even as an editing of the plugins, and you may be able to use it for decoding, to decode well-known ciphers also. Okay, so this interface provides a lot of, in fact, many other options. Okay, so further, if you are just going to go through, it will be helping you to crawl things, and then manually you can review the directory and the file list of any of the structures, and then you will be able to, okay, so get to more information about the what I say, website structures and any of the files that are available there. This is basically the sitemap of the target web application in the web suite. Okay, आप देख सकते हैं आपके पास host क्या है, method क्या था, URL क्या था, okay, parameter, status, and other things. Okay, so you can just basically look into it and understand it more detailed. What is the information about how things are being hosted and what is the directory structure and other informations. Then you have web-specific vulnerability scanners. Okay, there are several web-specific vulnerability scanners. They are basically nothing but an automation tool which can help you to crawl any application in order to identify the signatures of known vulnerabilities. As far as Kali is concerned, there are different pre-installed vulnerability scanners that you can use. And vulnerability scanner are mostly going to be noisy and usually detected by the victim. Okay, so generally you have to take care. Okay, you have to use in such a manner that you are not getting detected. However, if you are going to have a persistent attacks being happening, then that is one or the other day you may be detected. So most of the time what happens is if this kind of scans may be frequently getting ignored, okay, as part of a regular background activity. Okay, so that you need to look into, and this fact can be basically exploited by the attacker in order to launch a large-scale attack against any of the target, okay, in order to camouflage the real attack. And it can indulge into what is a action of disabling the detection system sometimes, and therefore you may not be able to detect any attacks. Now there may be different types of vulnerability scanners, okay, and this are listed onto the right hand side. You see that Nikto is one application scanner, and then you have Skipfish, you have WebKey, then you have Websploit, and then you have Zap. Okay, so all of these have got their own strength and weaknesses. Okay, so mostly you'll find out the Zap and Nikto and similar kind of things have been used in a very lucid manner. Now talking about some application-specific attacks. Okay, so you could have different types of application-specific attacks. These are basically an attack on specific application specific to operating system, including the misconfiguration, vulnerabilities, and logic errors that you can basically highlight. One thing is basically brute forcing the access credential. Okay, so if you are going to try out with all possible combinations, you may be one or the other day will be able to get to the credential and you may be able to bypass the security. Now, as far as Kali is concerned, Kali is going to come with various tools. One tool is called as a Hydra. Okay, Hydra is basically a command line tool which you can use, okay, in order to brute force or iterate possible username and the password against a specified service. So if you identify somehow that what are the services running, then in that case you can use Hydra for brute forcing the pass username and the password and breaking into the system. Okay, so there may be multiple communication protocol that may be supported by Hydra, which include the FTP, FTPS, HTTP, HTTPS. Okay, then you have Oracle, POP3, MySQL, LDAP, and many. So जितने popular protocols हैं वो सारे के सारे आप इसमें support करते हैं. Then another one is basically OS command injection using comics. Okay, so command injection exploiter or comics is basically a kind of an automation tool which is primarily written in Python. Okay, and this is basically pre-compiled or available with the Kali Linux platform to perform various OS command level, okay, what is a actions. Okay, so if the application is vulnerable to command injection. So what it does is basically it helps the attacker to inject any specific vulnerable part of the application or even into an HTTP header also. Okay, so attacker may use all the functionality provided by the comics by simply entering the command like comics -h in the terminal, and then you will be able to see that. Okay, so you have comics minus say URL and then other options. So when the comics tool is run against the vulnerable URL, okay, where in this example we have just given an example, assuming that a particular website is being hosted, okay, on a particular IP addresses. The penetration tester will be able to see the progress of the command execution on the target server and also be able to see which parameters are vulnerable. Okay, and you will be able to get a lot of information from this type of what is it, injections. So this is what you just see that the screen you will be basically getting when you are going to have a command injection using the comics. And once the injection is successful, attacker can basically run the command on the server. For example, you may be able to write dir to list all the files and the folders. Okay, so that can be basically done. So you will be getting all these informations. So now the tester should be careful while running this comics on the web application or the shared infrastructure, because you'll find out there will be significant load onto the memory of the hosting server, and therefore you may be getting detected. There is another tool called as an SQL map, which is available with Kali Linux. Okay, and this is one of the most common and exploitable vulnerabilities scanning tool. Okay, so you just say the most of the website may you will find out the injection vulnerability is most common vulnerability, and which occurs basically when the victim side does not monitor the user input, and therefore allowing the attacker to interact with the backend system. So typically an attacker can craft an input data to modify or steal the content from the databases और place an executable onto the server or issue commands to the operating system. तो उसके लिए आप SQL map use कर सकते हैं. So this is basically again a Python based tool, okay, which helps you to automate the recurrence and exploration of some of the other tools, including say Firebird, Microsoft SQL, etc. and so on. और database basically exploit करने के लिए आप या information gather करने के लिए आप SQL map use कर सकते हैं. Okay, so as far as the SQL map is concerned, you will find out that it will be basically able to list down, okay, the various tables or the schema or database, and database में tables में आपके जितने भी columns हैं या भी attributes हैं और even the attributes के जो record values हैं वो भी. So in that case, you may look into the username and a password which is stored in a particular table in a particular database and so on. So initially you may not be knowing anything about the database, which are the databases which are available onto the server. So using this SQL map, you will be able to get the information. So on the right hand side, you can say information schema. Okay, so information schema agar option aap dekhte hain, so in that case you will see that it will be helping you to give you the schema which is residing onto the server. Okay, so you will be able to get all the list of the tables. So in order to check all the tables in the database, you can just write the command like this SQL map -u and whatever the address is there, username, password, and all those things. So you will be able to get all the tables. So what tables reside onto the server, you will be able to see. You can dump, okay, the credentials also from that server. Okay, using the following command, you have -dump. Okay, and all the credentials are going to be dumped onto this, and which you can use later on for exploiting things. Okay, so जितने भी credentials available होंगे वो सारे आप dump करके रख सकते हैं. And finally, you will find out that after this, you will be able to get, in fact, it is not only the credential, any other kind of information that is stored onto the databases and the table in the record can be identified. Next thing is basically XML injection. Okay, so you'll find that most of the application today are now supporting extensible markup language, which is basically defining the set of rules for encoding the document that can be understood by both human beings and the machines. So XML is one of the way to exploit, okay, or XML injection is one of the ways to exploit the logic, okay, of an XML app or the service by injecting unexpected messages into the XML structure or the content. Okay, so once you are going to use this, okay, so you may be able to get a lot of information, okay, from this. And what is say, you may be even getting the informations like attacker may be able to potentially run any kind of PowerShell scripts by directly gaining the access to the entire system and then laterally moving with the target. Another type of attack, you have a bit flipping attack. Okay, bit flipping, you just see that if you are going to flip the bits, okay, change the bits, in that case detection can be a little bit difficult. Okay, so majority of the attackers do not basically focus on to crypto type attacks. Okay, and because it is going to be time consuming and requires significant computing power in order to crack the ciphertext. But this could be very, very important because people may be able to fiddle with the bits and therefore they may be appearing to be something very unusual or okay, a normal ones. Okay, so you can basically look after that also. So specifically when you have talked about the ciphering techniques, आप देख सकते हैं कि ciphering technique is basically concerned about basically changing the order of the bits and something like that so that they are encoded in a different manner. Okay, so bit flipping attack is nothing but basically changing the order, okay, so that you cannot be detected. Okay, तो ये आपका एक mechanism हो सकता है जो आप use कर सकते हैं. Then you are going to have the next one, maintaining the access with the web shells. Okay, so once the web server and its services have been compromised, it is very important to ensure that the secure access can be maintained, and this usually can be accomplished with the aid of the web shell, a small program that provides the stealth backdoor access and allows use of the system command to facilitate the post exploitation. Now, as far as Kali is concerned, it comes with several web shells. Okay, जिसमें आपके पास PHP web shell एक है जिसको कहते हैं Weebly. Okay, so Weebly is a very popular tool which is available with Kali, and you can use this for exploitation. Now, as far as the Weebly is concerned, Weebly simulates the telnet session and allows the user to attacker to basically take the advantage of more than say 30 modules for post exploitation tasks. जिसमें आप ब्राउजिंग ऑफ द टारगेट फाइल सिस्टम कर सकते हैं, फाइल ट्रांसफर कर सकते हैं, परफॉर्मिंग ऑफ द ऑडिट कर सकते हैं, ब्रूट फोर्सिंग ऑफ द एसक्यूएल अकाउंट्स कर सकते हैं, रिवर्स टीसीपी शेल एनालिसिस हो सकता है, एंड सो ऑन. So these are some of the things that you may be able to do as far as the Weebly is concerned. Okay, in order to basically use this, you can just say sudo Weebly generate. Okay, so this is going to be basically being used. Okay, so आप right side में आप देख सकते हैं कि आपको screen दिखाई देगा, and then you can just have a generate hacker, okay, 404.php, and then you will be able to generate all the related information. Okay, so that Weebly is one of the very important tools that you can basically use. So this is what is, we just say that in order to communicate with the web shell, we can issue the following commands, and this will ensure that the target IP address, directory, password variables, they are changed to reflect those compromised systems. Okay, and then you can verify that we are connected with the web shell using the whoami command, and आप देख सकते हैं यहाँ पे आपको वो information मिलेगी. The web shell can also be used to establish the reverse shell connection back to the tester using either the Netcat or the Metasploit framework, okay, as the local listener, and you will be able to verify that everything is going well. Then you have a browser exploitation framework. This is basically nothing but the client-side browser exploitation, which basically focuses on the specific client-side application and the browser, web browser. It allows an attacker to inject JavaScript code into vulnerable HTML code using attacks such as XSS or SQL injection. Okay, this is also sometimes called as a hook. A compromise is achieved when the hook is executed by the browser. So whenever the client is interacting with the application, okay, via the web browser, this is going to be executed, and then everything is going to be compromised. The browser will act as a zombie. It will connect back to the BEF application, which will serve the JavaScript command or the modules to the web browser. So therefore, anything and everything that is going to happen, okay, will be controlled here. So as far as the module is concerned, You may be able to do the fingerprinting and reconnaissance of the compromised web browsers. You may be able to fingerprint the target host. You'll be able to detect the software on the client. You may be able to take photos or record videos. You may be able to conduct the searches of the victim's data. Implementing the browser key stroke logging आप कर सकते हैं. You may be able to conduct the reconnaissance and ping sweeps कर सकते हैं. Or even you may be able to launch the attacks from the Metasploit framework if it is available. Okay, and you may be also able to tunnel the proxy framework also. Okay, so these are some of the salient features of the BEF that you can basically use, and that's why you say even in industry, a lot of people have been using the BEF on a larger scale. So these are the various tasks that I have just mentioned. Okay, that you can use. Okay, as far as the BEF module is concerned. Now you can also use BEF as a tunneling proxy. Okay, proxy tunneling is nothing but basically the process of encapsulating the payload protocol inside a delivery protocol. Okay, such as an IP or something like IP and IP, something like that. So if you are going to use this tunneling, you may be able to transmit even the incompatible protocol across the network, and network will not be able to detect it and discard it. So basically, you will be able to bypass the firewall that are configured to block a particular type of a protocol. So as far as the BF is concerned, it can be configured to act as a tunneling proxy, okay, which will be mimicking the HTTP proxy. Okay, so that is one of the important features. Now you'll say that if you have implemented the tunneling, okay, so in that case, whatever you want to transmit, okay, across the network can be safely being transmitted. Okay, so this configuration is extremely useful when internal network has been compromised, because the tunneling proxy can be used to do the following things. You will be able to browse authenticated authenticated website in the security context, spread the hook domain using the security context of the victim browser, facilitate the use of the tools such as SQL injection. Okay, so these are some of the things that you will be able to do. Okay, if you are using the BF as an tunneling proxy. Okay, so proxy and that to tunneling. So in that case, you will be actually encapsulating something inside other, so that things will not be identifiable. So by and large, what we have discussed today is that we have discussed about the how do you bypass the security controls, and how do you basically compromise the web applications, or how do you bypass these things. And at the same time, the same tools, similar tools can also help you to identify that whether these are vulnerabilities and my server can be basically compromised, and in that case what remedies I can do. In the previous session, I have suggested you the various different types of remedies that has to be looked into as far as the web server and web application is concerned. Okay, so that was the discussion that we wanted to do today. Okay, so let me just quickly give you the attendance sheet. So attendance sheet is put into the chat window, so you can just fill that. Remember, the attendance sheet remains same, okay, across all the lectures. Okay, so even if I am not giving, so in that case, during that time, you can just fill the attendance during the session. Okay, so thank you for listening to me. We have just overall discussed about the unit 3. Now, as far as the internal is concerned, you will be getting unit 3 as the internal portion, okay, not the unit 4. Okay, Shalo, thank you for the day. We may be having another session or the lecture in the evening. Okay, if 6 to 8 you are free, then in that case we will be having a lecture at 6 to 8 in the evening today. Yeah, thank you.